Recently, I made a video about Japan's shrinking population and how this is causing big problems for the country's economy. And while making that video, I came across some really interesting statistics. For example, in 2018, there were 9 million homes empty in Japan. That's 13% of all housing units. There are entire cities in Japan with more ghosts than people. But I've been thinking about this problem lately, and I think I have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen next. Now, this is just my opinion, so don't take it as financial advice or anything like that. But I am fairly confident that the collapse of Japan's real estate market is coming soon. I mean, it's already started collapsing, but I think we haven't seen anything yet. In this video, I'm going to try to answer these 3 questions. How did so many homes become empty in the first place? Why aren't they being used? And what will happen when Japan's population continues to decline? This video might be a little bit different from others because this issue is so complex. So please stick around till the end to get the full picture. Also, if you could do me a huge favor and hit the like button, that would be amazing. Thank you guys so much. So first, let's talk about how so many homes became empty in the first place. Japan's population has been on a steady decline since 2008. This is mostly due to 2 reasons. First, the elderly population in Japan is exploding. They have one of the highest life expectancies in the world. And second, Japanese people aren't having as many kids as they used to. They have one of the lowest birth rates in the world. Now, when you have fewer people living in your country, you don't need as much housing. Simple supply and demand economics. But there's another problem. Families in Japan tend to own multiple homes. It's very common to see an elderly person living in their own home while their kids live in an apartment nearby. When you combine this with the fact that families are getting smaller, you have a lot of empty homes. For example, in 2018, 70% of empty homes were detached houses and 20% were apartments. Why? Because of the way Japanese families are structured. You see, in many countries, when parents retire, they move into a smaller house or maybe an apartment. Then their kids can use the bigger house. But in Japan, the parents usually stay in their house, and the children either buy their own place or rent. So instead of moving into their parents' house, the Japanese pass down their house to their kids, even if they don't need it. And then everybody keeps living in their own separate homes. In fact, according to the Land Ministry, 38.4% of empty homes are owned by families with a member over 65 years old. Another 26.2% belong to non-families, which means they were probably left behind by a relative who's now gone. All of this leads to a massive amount of wasted property. And here's where things get interesting. In most countries, when a house is empty, something eventually happens to it. Maybe squatters move in, maybe it gets torn down. But in Japan, empty homes are still treated like gold. People save up money for years to buy a home in Japan, even if it's just a vacant luxury apartment nobody wants. If you're Japanese and you want to buy a house, you're not going to settle for anything less than your dream home, even if that home is haunted. So let's talk about why these homes aren't being used. The biggest reason is that they're too expensive. Now, this doesn't make sense at first. Surely, if no one is living in these houses, their price should go down. Well, that's true, except most of these homes aren't on the market. For example, half of all detached houses in Japan are non-transactional. This means they're not being sold or rented out. Instead, they are being held onto for sentimental reasons or because the owners believe their value will increase in the future. In fact, a recent survey found that 48.1% of people in Japan believe that real estate prices will rise over the next 5 years. And as a result, only 10% of people said they would consider selling their homes. The same thing is happening in the commercial real estate market. Tokyo is a great example. About 20% of office space in central Tokyo is empty, but that hasn't lowered prices. Instead, business owners are holding out, hoping that one day they can lease their properties for even higher prices. But it's unlikely that's ever going to happen. Now, it's not just greed that's keeping these homes off the market. There are other factors too. For example, Japan has a complicated real estate transaction process. There are a lot of rules and regulations, and it can take a long time to sell a property. Another problem is that Japanese banks won't lend money to foreigners looking to buy property. which makes it harder for foreign investors to purchase homes. On top of that, real estate agents in Japan don't work the same way they do in America. They don't really try to sell properties. Instead, they simply connect buyers and sellers and collect a commission. So there's not really any incentive for real estate agents to actually sell homes. Now, there are some areas in Japan where you can find really cheap homes, but they come with one big problem. According to the government, 38.4% of all empty homes are in areas where serious damage has been done from natural disasters. Basically, if you want to buy a cheap home in Japan, you have to live somewhere that's constantly being ravaged by earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. So most people aren't willing to take that risk. Now let's talk about what will happen when Japan's population continues to decline. Japan's population will continue to decline for at least the next 100 years. The government is projecting that the population will drop from 125 million to 100 million people by 2100. This is an absolutely massive drop. But here's the scary part. Population decline isn't the worst part. It's the aging population that's causing all of the problems. You see, when people get older, they tend to spend less money. It's just the way it is. This is known as the graying of the population. And it's happening all over the world, not just in Japan. In fact, Japan is ahead of the curve. Here in America, the elderly population is expected to double by 2050. But in Japan, it's already doubled. From 2000 to 2018, the number of elderly people in Japan increased from 18.7% to 28.1%. This is putting a huge burden on the economy. For example, elderly people aren't spending as much money as they used to. This is leading to less corporate profits, which means less economic growth. To make matters worse, the elderly population is draining Japan's pension fund. By 2040, the fund will run out of money. And that's just another reason why Japan is facing a financial disaster. Now, you might be thinking, why doesn't the government fix this problem? After all, it's not too late. They could raise taxes, cut back on social welfare programs, or maybe even print more money. Well, it's not that easy. If Japan starts raising taxes, the elderly will have even less money to spend, which will hurt the economy even more. If they cut back on social welfare programs, the elderly might not have enough money to live on. And if they start printing more money, well, we all know how that ends. Inflation. Now, this might be a little bit off topic, but I've been thinking about Japan's quantitative easing program for a while now. Japan has been buying a lot of its own government debt. In fact, almost 50% of all JGBs are owned by the Bank of Japan. Now, I'm not an economist or anything, but I think this is kind of dangerous. I mean, if the Bank of Japan stops buying government debt, interest rates will skyrocket, and the Japanese economy will collapse. All right, now let's get back on topic. The Japanese real estate market is already in trouble. House prices have been falling for years, but I think things are about to get a lot worse. You see, most of the homes that are being built in Japan today are for the elderly. Not because young people don't need homes, but because they can't afford them. The median age of first-time homebuyers in Japan is now 37 for men and 35 for women. That's the highest it's ever been. Now, it's normal for the median age to go up slowly over time, but it's never gone up this fast. In fact, the median age went up twice as fast in the 2010s compared to the 1990s. This is because young people in Japan are struggling to pay for homes. For example, the average price of a detached house in Japan is 42 million yen, or $377,000. That's way too expensive for most young people. In fact, almost 70% of young people in Japan can't afford to buy a house. This is leading to a whole new generation of renters. Now, you might be thinking, who cares? Renters are good for the economy. They stimulate demand. Well, that's true, except renters tend to spend less money overall. For example, renters spend less money on furniture, appliances, and home goods. They also spend less money on things like utilities and maintenance. On top of that, renters tend to move around a lot, which means they don't have the time or money to build up a social life in their communities. All of this leads to less economic activity, and that's why homeowners are better for the economy than renters. Unfortunately for Japan, more and more young people are becoming renters every year. Now, I'm not saying the Japanese real estate market is going to crash tomorrow. In fact, I think prices will continue to go up in the short term, But in the long run, they have to come down. There's just too much empty housing in Japan. Prices have to fall to make it worth people's while to buy a home. Japan is unlike any other country in the world. It has a unique culture, history, and set of circumstances. And I think this is going to lead to a totally unprecedented real estate collapse. All right, everyone. That's it for tonight. Please don't forget to smash the like button. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.